The fluorescent lights of the Kroger felt like needles in my eyes. I stood at the register, my hands trembling as I clutched a small, wilted bouquet of carnations and a single tin of Alpo. The cashier, a girl no older than my granddaughter, didn't look up. She just scanned the items with a rhythmic, soul-crushing beep. "That'll be $12.84, sir," she said, her voice flat. I slid my debit card through the reader, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew the balance was low, but the Social Security check should have cleared at midnight. The machine paused, thinking, before delivering a sharp, mocking buzz. Declined. I swallowed hard, the taste of copper in my mouth. "Try it again, please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "There must be a mistake." She sighed, a sound of pure annoyance that echoed through the line of impatient shoppers behind me. People started checking their watches, shifting their weight. I tried again. Declined. The heat climbed up my neck, a burning shame I hadn't felt since I was a boy in hand-me-down boots. "Sir, there's no money on the card," the girl said, louder this time. A man behind me huffed. "Come on, old man, some of us have jobs to get to." I looked at the carnations, the ones I promised Martha I'd bring every Sunday. I looked at the dog food for Buster, who hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. I felt small. I felt invisible. I felt like a ghost haunting a world that had moved on without me. I apologized to the air, my head bowed, and walked out into the biting Ohio wind without the flowers or the food. I walked 3 miles to the cemetery, my knees popping with every step, the damp cold seeping into my marrow. I sat on the frozen grass beside Martha's headstone, the marble cold against my back. My stomach growled, a hollow, angry sound. I didn't have a penny left, and I didn't understand why. I had worked 43 years at the steel mill, never missed a day, never asked for a handout. Now, I couldn't even buy my wife a flower. I closed my eyes, praying for the ground to just open up and take me too, when I heard the crunch of gravel nearby. A shadow fell over me, and a voice I didn't recognize spoke my name with a tone of pure shock. "Sergeant Carter, is that really you, sitting in the dirt?" I didn't look up at first. I couldn't. The shame was a physical weight, pressing my chin toward my chest. I stared at my shoes, old Sears work boots with soles so thin I could feel every pebble. My hands were tucked into my armpits to keep the tremors from showing. "I think you have the wrong man," I said, my voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. But the footsteps didn't move away. They came closer, steady and deliberate, until a pair of expensive leather loafers appeared in my line of sight. These weren't the shoes of a local. They were the shoes of someone who lived a life I had forgotten existed. "I'd know that posture anywhere," the man said. "3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, Hugh City, 1968. You carried my father 3 miles through a god-forsaken rice paddy with a hole in your shoulder the size of a grapefruit." I slowly raised my head. The man standing there looked to be in his 50s, wearing a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than my last 3 years of pension. He had a face that looked familiar, though I couldn't place it through the fog of my grief. He was looking at me not with pity, but with a kind of horrified reverence. He saw the thinness of my coat, the way my skin hung off my cheekbones, and the lack of flowers on Martha's grave. "I'm just Raymond now," I managed to say, trying to stand up. My legs betrayed me, buckling under the sudden movement. He caught me before I hit the stone, his grip firm and strong. It had been so long since another human being had touched me with anything other than clinical indifference. "Easy, Sergeant," he whispered. "I'm Thomas Miller. My father, Jackson, talked about you every day until he passed. He said you were the bravest man he ever knew." I looked away, my eyes stinging. Brave men don't get their grocery carts declined. Brave men don't let their dogs go hungry because they can't figure out where their money went. I thought about the house, the quiet, freezing rooms where I spent my nights staring at the ceiling. I thought about my son, David, who had visited 3 weeks ago with important papers for me to sign so he could help with the bills. I felt a cold realization beginning to dawn on me, a betrayal sharper than the winter air. Thomas Miller looked at my empty hands, then back at the grave. "Where are her flowers, Raymond?" he asked softly. And that was the moment the first tear finally broke free. I wiped the tear away quickly with the back of a scarred hand, trying to reclaim some shred of my dignity. "Forgot 'em," I lied, the word tasting like ash. Old age makes the mind go soft, I suppose. But Thomas Miller wasn't a man who accepted easy lies. He looked at my threadbare sleeve and the way I was shivering, despite my best efforts to hold steady. "Let's get you out of the cold, Sergeant," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He led me to a black SUV parked on the gravel path, a vehicle that purred like a satisfied cat when he started the engine. The heat hit my face, and for a second I felt like I was melting. I hadn't felt true warmth in my own house for over a month. As we drove, the silence in the car felt heavy. I didn't want to tell him the truth. I didn't want to tell the son of a war hero that I was a failure. But as we passed the Walmart, I thought of Buster waiting by the door, his tail giving that one hopeful wag to spite his empty bowl. "I need to stop," I mumbled. "For the dog." Thomas didn't just stop. He followed me inside. When we got to the register, I reached for my pocket out of habit, but he already had a black card in his hand. He bought the high-end steak, the heavy bags of kibble, and a massive bouquet of lilies, Martha's favorite. He didn't say a word about the card I'd tucked away, the one I knew was useless. He drove me back to my small ranch-style house on the outskirts of town. The yard was overgrown, the siding gray and peeling. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw a bright orange sticker plastered to the front door. My heart stopped. I scrambled out of the car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was a notice of foreclosure. The bank was taking the house in 48 hours. "This can't be," I whispered, clutching the paper until my knuckles turned white. "I paid this house off in '94. I have the deed in the safe." I fumbled with my keys, my mind racing. I had signed those papers for David. He told me it was for a tax exemption. He told me he was protecting my assets. I pushed the door open, the air inside smelling of dust and loneliness, and ran to the small floor safe in the closet. The door was already ajar. The safe was empty. Not just the deed was gone, but the emergency cash, Martha's wedding ring, and my silver star. My own son had picked me clean while I was sleeping in the next room. I sat on the edge of my bed, the empty safe staring back at me like an open wound. Thomas stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking out the dim light of the hallway. He didn't ask what was missing. He could see it written in the slump of my shoulders. "My son," I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "He said he was helping. He said the VA was changing the rules, and he needed to be my representative payee." I looked up at Thomas, my eyes wide with a desperate, childish hope that I was wrong. "He's my boy, Thomas. I taught him how to throw a baseball in this backyard. I worked double shifts at the mill for 20 years to pay for his college. He wouldn't. He couldn't." Thomas walked over and knelt down so we were eye level. "Greed does strange things to people, Raymond, even family." He pulled out his phone and made a few quick calls, his voice sharp and professional. He was a high-ranking district attorney in the city, I realized. He wasn't just a passerby. He was a storm gathering on the horizon. While he talked, I walked into the kitchen. I opened the tap to make some hot water to settle my stomach, but nothing came out. Just a dry, metallic hiss. The utilities had been shut off. I looked at Buster, who was sniffing the bags of food Thomas had carried in. The dog looked up at me, his eyes cloudy with cataracts, and let out a soft whine. He knew. Animals always know when the pack is falling apart. "Your accounts have been drained, Raymond," hanging up the phone. His face was a mask of cold fury.
Not just the Social Security, your pension from the mill, your VA disability, all of it was rerouted to a private account in David's name 2 months ago. He filed a claim stating you were mentally incompetent. The words hit me harder than any punch I'd taken in the ring. Incompetent. I was quiet, yes. I was grieving, but I wasn't gone. I still remembered the smell of Martha's perfume. I still remembered the serial number of my M14. I sat there in the dark, cold house, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I'd lived with honor, realizing that to the world and to my own flesh and blood, I was just a line item to be deleted. I felt a sob building in my chest, a deep, primal thing I'd kept locked away since the day we buried Martha. I tried to swallow it, to be the sergeant again, but the weight of the betrayal was too much. I put my head in my hands, and finally, I let out a sound that didn't belong to a man of 79 years. It was the sound of a heart finally breaking.
The darkness of the house seemed to grow heavier with every minute. Thomas didn't try to comfort me with empty words. He let me cry until the well ran dry, standing guard by the kitchen table like a sentry. When I finally wiped my face, I felt a strange, cold clarity. The sadness was still there, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A flicker of the man who had survived the jungle and the heat of the blast furnaces. "I want to see him," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. "I want to look at him and ask him why." Thomas nodded. "We'll do better than that. But first, we need to get you somewhere warm." He took me to a hotel in town, a place with thick carpets and a shower that ran hot for as long as I wanted. I scrubbed the grime of the cemetery and the dust of my dying house off my skin. I looked at myself in the mirror, ribs showing, hair white and wild. I looked like a man who had given up. I shaved my face with the straight razor Thomas bought me, taking my time with every stroke. I put on a clean shirt he'd provided. I wasn't going to meet my son as a victim. I was going to meet him as a father. While I dressed, Thomas was on his laptop. He had found David. My son wasn't struggling. He wasn't behind on bills. He had just closed on a luxury condo in the city and had been seen at a high-end charity gala the night before. He was using my sweat and my blood to buy a life he hadn't earned. "He's at a brunch meeting at the Oakwood Club," Thomas said, checking his watch. "He thinks you're sitting in that cold house, too ashamed to tell anyone what's happening." Thomas looked at me, a grim smile touching his lips. "He has no idea that the man you saved 40 years ago left behind a son who doesn't like bullies." We drove to the club, a gated place with manicured lawns and a silence that screamed of old money. I sat in the passenger seat, my hand resting on Buster's head in the back. I felt like an intruder, a ghost from a world of soot and steel, entering a world of silk and lies. As we pulled up to the valet, I saw David through the large glass windows of the dining room. He was laughing, holding a mimosa, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked happy. He looked free. He looked like a man who had successfully buried his father while the old man was still breathing. I stepped out of the car, my spine straight, and felt the eyes of the wealthy patrons turn toward my old work boots. The hostess at the Oakwood Club tried to stop us. She looked at my boots in the way I didn't fit the aesthetic of the room. "Sir, this is a private event," she said, her voice dripping with practiced politeness that felt like an insult. Thomas didn't even slow down. He flashed a badge, a different kind than the police, something that made her face go pale instantly. "State's Attorney's Office," he said. "We're here for Mr. Carter." We walked into the dining room, the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of important conversations dying out as we approached David's table. David didn't see me until I was standing right in front of him. He was mid-sentence, telling a joke to a woman in a Chanel suit. When his eyes finally landed on me, his face underwent a transformation I'll never forget. The color drained out of him, replaced by a gray, sickly hue. He dropped his fork, the silver clattering loudly against the china.
"Dad?" he stammered, his voice jumping an octave. "You're supposed to be— you should have called. I was going to come check on you this evening." "With a moving truck, David?" I asked. The room was silent now. Every head was turned toward us. I felt the pride I'd carried all my life swell in my chest, a bitter, hard thing. "I went to buy flowers for your mother today. My card was declined. I went home to find a foreclosure notice on the door. I checked the safe, David. The ring I gave her in 1964 is gone." David tried to stand up, his hands shaking as he adjusted his tie. "Dad, you're confused. You're not well. We talked about this. I'm managing your affairs because you've been forgetting things. This is exactly what I was worried about, you wandering off." He looked at the people at his table, a pathetic, pleading look in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, everyone. My father he has some cognitive issues. It's been very hard on the family." He reached out to grab my arm, his grip tight and commanding, trying to lead me away like a disobedient child. "Let's get you back to the home, Dad. We'll talk about this later." I didn't move. I felt like an oak tree rooted in the floor. I looked him dead in the eyes, the same eyes he got from me, and I realized I didn't recognize the soul behind them. "I remember everything, David," I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room. "I remember the day you were born. I remember the 43 years I spent in the mill so you'd never have to. And I remember exactly what I signed. I just didn't think my own son would be the one to kill me."
David's face twisted into something ugly, the mask of the concerned son slipping to reveal the predator beneath. "You're making a scene, old man," he hissed, leaning in so only I could hear. "You have nothing. I own the house. I own the accounts. You're a ward of the state if I say you are. Now get out of here before I have security throw you into the gutter where you belong." He turned back to his guests, trying to salvage his reputation. "I'm so embarrassed. He's been off his meds. I've tried everything, but some people just don't want to be helped." The woman in the Chanel suit looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, as if I were a stain on the tablecloth. I felt the familiar urge to apologize, to shrink back into the shadows and disappear. That was the old-school dignity I'd lived by. Don't cause trouble, don't be a burden. But then I felt Thomas's hand on my shoulder. "Mr. David Carter," Thomas said, his voice ringing out like a bell. "I'm Thomas Miller, Senior Deputy District Attorney, and this is Sergeant Raymond Carter, a Silver Star recipient and a man who has more honor in his pinky finger than you have in your entire body." Thomas pulled a folder from his coat and dropped it on the table, right into David's plate of Eggs Benedict. "This is a temporary restraining order and a freeze on all assets associated with the Raymond Carter Trust. We've already flagged the power of attorney you obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation. And as for the cognitive issues," Thomas leaned over the table, his eyes burning, "I spent the last 2 hours with the VA doctors who did your father's last physical. They're more than happy to testify that he's as sharp as a tack. They're also very interested in why his medication refills were never picked up from the pharmacy." David looked at the folder, then at Thomas, then at the room full of people who were now whispering and pointing. The power was shifting, the air in the room turning cold for him. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a strangled wheeze. "This is a mistake. You can't just do this." Thomas leaned in closer. "I can, and I did. And by the way, I'm also looking into the sale of a certain diamond ring to a pawn shop on 4th Street. That's felony grand theft when it involves a vulnerable adult, David. We'll be waiting for you in the lobby with the police." I watched my son's world crumble, but I didn't feel the joy I thought I would. I just felt a profound, echoing emptiness. I turned and walked toward the door, my legs heavy as lead. I waited on the sidewalk outside the club, the cold air feeling cleaner than the air inside. Thomas stood beside me, silent, letting me process the wreckage. A few minutes later, 2 police officers led David out in handcuffs.
He wasn't yelling anymore. He looked small. He looked like the boy I used to catch stealing cookies from the jar, only there was no light in his eyes, just a desperate, calculating fear. He looked at me as they moved him toward the squad car. "Dad, tell them it's a mistake. You can't let them do this to me. I'm your son." I didn't say a word. I just watched the light bar on the police car flash, red, blue, red, blue. It reminded me of the sirens in the distance back in the mill towns when a shift went wrong. I thought about all the times I'd protected him, when he crashed his first car, when he got into trouble at school. I had always been there to catch him, but this time the ground was gone for both of us. "Are you okay, Raymond?" Thomas asked softly. I looked at the lilies he had bought from Martha, still sitting on the dashboard of his car. "I'm tired, Thomas," I said. "I've been working since I was 14 years old. I think I'm finally just tired." We drove back to my house. The orange sticker was still there, but Thomas tore it off and crumpled it into a ball. "The house is yours, Raymond. The bank has been notified of the fraud. The utilities will be back on within the hour. I've arranged for a service to come by and help you get things back in order." He walked me to the door, carrying the lilies and the steak for Buster. The dog was waiting, his tail thumping against the floorboards. I sat down in my old recliner, the one that still had the indent of my body from decades of use. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel quite as empty. Thomas stayed for a while, helping me put away the groceries. He talked about his father, Jackson, and how he used to tell stories about the Sarge who never quit no matter how thick the fire got. "You saved my family 3 generations ago, Raymond," Thomas said as he stood at the door to leave. "I'm just paying back the interest." He left his card on the table and told me to call him for anything at all. I sat in the dark for a long time after he left, listening to the house creak as the heat pipes began to moan and groan back to life. I felt a sense of justice, yes, but the twist in my gut wasn't gone. There was one thing left to do, one thing that Thomas couldn't fix with a badge or a bank account.
The next morning, the sun broke through the Ohio gray, a pale gold light that made the frost on the windows sparkle like diamonds. I felt better than I had in years, physically at least. My stomach was full, the house was warm, and Buster was snoring at my feet. But the silence was different now. It was the silence of a man who had won the battle but lost the war. I took the lilies and drove my old truck, which Thomas had helped me get out of the impound lot, back to the cemetery. I sat in the same spot by Martha's grave. I laid the lilies down, their scent filling the cold air. "I'm sorry it took so long, girl," I whispered. "Things got a little complicated." I stayed there for hours, talking to her about David. I told her how I failed him, how maybe I worked too hard and didn't teach him enough about what matters. I told her I missed her until my chest ached. I was about to leave when I saw a woman approaching. She was older, maybe in her late 60s, dressed in a simple wool coat. She held a single rose. She stopped at the grave next to Martha's, the grave of a man named Elias Vance. I recognized the name. Elias had worked the furnaces with me for 30 years. He died of the black lung a decade ago. The woman looked at me, her eyes crinkling in a sad smile. "You're Raymond, aren't you? Elias always talked about you, said you were the only one who didn't look down on him when he got sick." I nodded. Elias was a good man, hardest worker I ever knew. We stood there in the quiet of the dead, 2 relics of a world that didn't exist anymore. She looked at Martha's flowers. "Those are beautiful. Your son must be very proud of the way you take care of her." I felt a sharp sting in my throat. I didn't tell her the truth. I didn't tell her my son was in a cell. I just nodded. But then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I found this at a local shop yesterday," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought it was a replica, but when I saw the engraving on the inside, I knew it had to be real. The shop owner said a young man sold it for a pittance." She opened the box. Resting on the red velvet was Martha's wedding ring.
The gold was scuffed, but the small diamond still caught the morning sun. The woman handed it to me. I couldn't leave it there, not when I saw the name Raymond and Martha inside. I held the ring in my palm, the metal cold but familiar. It felt like a piece of my soul had been returned to me. The woman, Elias's widow, Sarah, refused to take any money for it. "Just keep the memory alive, Raymond," she said, squeezing my hand before walking away. I sat back down on the grass and slid the ring onto my pinky finger. It was too small for any other. It felt like a promise that no matter how hard the world tried to erase me, I was still here. The justice Thomas promised came swiftly. David was charged with elder abuse and grand larceny. He tried to call me from the jail, pleading for me to drop the charges, to tell the DA it was all a big misunderstanding. I listened to his voice for 30 seconds, the same voice that had told me I was incompetent just days before. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a quiet, heavy sorrow. "I love you, David," I said, my voice crackling with age and truth. "But I'm not the man who catches you anymore. You have to stand on your own 2 feet now, even if they're in a cell." I hung up the phone and never looked back. I stayed in my house. Thomas checked on me every week, often bringing his kids by to hear stories about the mill and the war. I wasn't the useless old man the world tried to make me. I was a library of a time gone by, a living testament to a kind of strength that doesn't show up on a bank statement. I spent my afternoons walking Buster and my Sundays with Martha. I was alone, yes, but I wasn't lonely. I had my dignity, I had my home, and I had the ring back on my finger. One evening, as the sun set over the Ohio fields, I sat on my porch and watched the fireflies start to dance. I realized that the twist wasn't the betrayal or the rescue. The twist was that at 79, I finally learned that being proud doesn't mean suffering in silence. It means knowing when to let someone see the fire still burning inside you. I closed my eyes, the warmth of the evening air on my face, and for a long, long time, I wasn't afraid of the dark.